Hi, everybody. I hope you're doing marvelously well. I'm very excited to have my good friend, the amazing arranger, Mr. Richard Niles, who put out an incredibly successful video course on arranging and now has a book called Arrange Like a Pro. String arranger extraordinaire, horn arranger extraordinaire, I suppose just arranger extraordinaire. Would that be a good way to introduce?
I think I always prefer to be called an arranger in general if they're going to call me an arranger, but it's surprising how people always typecast you. You know, people would say, "Oh, Warren, you're only a rock producer." Well, actually, I produce other things myself, but you see, but they love to typecast you, and that's okay with me as long as they are giving me rectangular pieces of paper with zeros on them at the same time.
What could you mean? So, Richard, in creating the original video course, and then, of course, the book that you've now created around that, what was the sort of thought process? How have you laid this out to take somebody through the journey of becoming a great arranger like yourself?
Well, I explain everything so that it will be helpful for anyone to understand, because the principles of arranging are the principles of communication. I don't say a man got run over by a car, a man woke up, a man had a cup of coffee, a man crossed the street. You know, I don't say things in that order. I arrange my communication to say the man woke up, had a cup of coffee, crossed the street, and got hit by a car. That makes more sense. And it's the exact same principles that I have laid out in the course, showing examples of everything. I think everyone who deals in music knows that songs have certain parts of them. They have intros, they have verses, they have choruses. So you have to know how those things are laid out. It's the way that you're communicating. And at the same time, you also know that songs, like any story that you tell, will have dynamics. It will rise to a climax, and it will come down again and tell more of the story and rise to another climax. That's what records do. And so these are all the things that I tried to lay out in order of the way that we all think about songs. We all enjoy a song, but why is this song so effective? Why was this song that came out in 1973 so successful? Well, here are the things that helped it be successful. Why is this song by Lil Nas X? Why was it so successful? What were the same elements that were used on pop songs in the 50s or 70s or whatever, used on his records? So these are all the kinds of things that I try to lay out and show examples of. It was really actually so wonderful that you gave me the challenge of not talking about music theory in this course, because it was so much better to show the principles of arranging. Because music theory is another level of, you know, whether you're going to use major or minor chords, or whether you're going to use this voicing or that voicing. What's important is the storytelling. We are all, in whatever profession we're in music, we're all storytellers. That's what I was trying to show, the best way to tell whatever story you have.
This morning I was driving my daughter to school. There was some music on the radio we were listening to, and she asked me about the singer. And I said, "Oh, the singer's, you know, a wonderful artist." And she said, "Oh, so they paint as well?" But I just realized that is the thing, isn't it? That's why we call them artists. And I love the analogy of painting.
I think it's great because there's no difference between a painter and a dancer and a writer and a musician. We're all doing the same thing. We are expressing something. You know, the word art is fascinating to me because it used to mean the art of the alchemist, the art to turn lead into gold, the art to turn nothing into something. And that's what we do. We walk into a studio, there's nothing recorded. We've got a bunch of musicians who haven't played anything yet. And then using our art, meaning our artistic skill, we are able to make something happen where there was nothing. And that's the art of all artists.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about is just like the dumb questions that I want to know. As an arranger, for instance, somebody sends you a song, and I know your arrangements fairly well, and they can be one of two very different things or a combination thereof. They can be something incredibly supportive that takes the melody into new places and supports it. And then you have a really strong penchant, shall we say, for doing absolute amazing insanity, which I love. You know, when I was listening down to the Grace Jones stuff with Stephen Lipson, it was some of the stuff we were soloing was just like, what was he thinking? I mean, we loved it, but where does that come from? So my question is, when somebody sends you something, do they often provide you with a brief, or are they pretty much hiring Richard Niles because you're Richard Niles and say, do your thing? And if you are doing your thing, what is your decision-making process, whether it be supportive, insane, or anywhere in the middle?
Well, the first thing that's interesting about all of our lives in music is that we're all collaborators. The producer collaborates with the artist and with the songwriter, just as the arranger does. At the beginning of my career, I always got a brief, and I love getting a brief. It's my favorite thing. And of course, when I did commercials, which I did a lot of, that was completely a brief. Sometimes I didn't even meet the people I was working for. I just got the brief and you went for it. But I have to enter into what I call a creative collaboration with the artist, the producer, whoever it is. I have to collaborate with them. And sometimes it's obvious what is needed because there are certain principles of arranging. Now, what's interesting to me and what I tried to do in Arrange Like a Pro was give the basic principles of arranging that everyone should be thinking about. And many of them are the same principles of producing. You definitely, your job is to make the artist look good. But there's a lot of ways to do it. Sometimes they aren't the ways that immediately pop up. And, you know, it depends completely on your background. Now, as you've said, you've had a very wide musical background, and so have I. You know, I was brought up by a father who was a jazz musician and in the music of the Great American Songbook. But then I also grew up in the 60s going to clubs and seeing all these rock bands like The Who and Jimi Hendrix and Cream in their early gigs in small clubs. So it was just so great to have that combination. And some people really enjoy belonging to a club. You know, they say, I'm a rocker, or I'm a this or that. I've never enjoyed that. What I love is music. I love how it can express different things. Of course, there's crap music, and we all, you know, would rather not be involved with that. But as an arranger, you asked me the question, I'm going to tell you sometimes I get something that isn't very good. And I think, well, what can I do to make it better? One of the big problems I've had on a lot of sort of trouble arrangements that I've had is that the song is just not that well constructed, and they do silly things like they don't have the vocal chorus in the chorus at a pitch about a fourth higher than the rest of the song. Now, you'll notice that hit songs, I actually did a research project, and I realized that something like 95% of all hit songs have the chorus higher than the verses. Now, it's sort of songwriting 101, and yet a lot of people move that. So then you have to think, what can I do to the chorus to make it have that high, exciting, dynamic push up? So there are things like that you choose to do. Now, some records, like Depeche Mode, it was just a really nice song. And I did 2 songs for them, and they were both really nice songs. So I didn't want to go apeshit, crazy, bonkers, driller killer. There was no need to. I wanted to enhance this beautiful songs that they'd written. But on the other hand, with Grace Jones, I mean, Trevor Horn said to me, impress me. Now, you know, that is a red rag to this bull, certainly. And I had as much fun as I could, you know, because you knew you were working with people who wanted exciting new ideas. So that's really how I make my decisions. But they're always based on the principles that I express in Arrange Like a Pro, which is to understand the song construction, see which parts of the song need helping, which parts of the songs you leave alone, thinking about dynamics, all of these things. And what I do in the Arrange Like a Pro tapes, which was really fun to do, was to take so many hits from different eras of pop and show how they all use the same principles to help a song be a hit. They all use the same principles. And so that's what I've tried to do.
About 7 or 8 years ago, these two guys came by my studio with this algorithm they had concocted. They had taken, I don't remember how many thousands and thousands of songs, but they'd analyzed all of these thousands of songs and come up with basically the same ideas that you are sharing here. One of the things, though, in the vocal was that most of the hit songs that they analyzed, the vocal was right at the edge of where it sounded good, right on the edge of just breaking. And that extra kind of angst in the vocal was what they believed part of a hit song. Now, bearing in mind everything you just explained, which was fantastic, and that kind of information, which I get as well, that kind of like just, right on the edge. Do you think about that with, with strings, with horns, with whatever instruments you're arranging? Are there some tips?
Yeah, absolutely. And the first thing I would say is let's go back to the vocals. Now, many songs over the years, I've heard a song and I say, the song's in the wrong key for the singer, don't you? And they say, why? And I say, because it's not at that edge. You've got to pitch this at least a third higher and it'll sound much better. And they say, oh, well, I don't know, that's just the way we played it. Or with a band especially, that's the key I can play it in on the guitar. I say, forget that. Let's get the song in your vocal register. I can't even impress upon you how sad it is that I've heard this so many times and faced this so many times. With instruments, it's the same principle because what you're talking here is about orchestration. You don't write John Bon Jovi's voice in the same range as you would write Neil Diamond's voice, because they're different singers, So you want to get John Bon Jovi's voice right up there where sounds like he's screaming, but he can control it because he's a great singer. And equally with somebody like Johnny Cash, his low register is the special register of his voice. And it's the same thing with cellos. You want to use their most evocative registers. I just did a whole album of duets with piano and cello, and I thought about that very much of those ranges of the instrument. It's the same thing with strings. Also, remember that if you're writing things like strings, or indeed synthesizers or sounds or sequencers, you've got to think about where the band is. The band is right in that middle register. Quite frankly, if you write in that middle register, what you've written is going to be, or what you've added to the track, if it's synthesizer, sequencers, or whatever, it's going to get lost. So you've got to think, well, I've got to get it up. I've got to get it, in that super bass register. That's orchestration and arranging, which I really don't feel there's any difference between those things. And whether you're working with a small synth setup and you're adding sounds to your song, or whether you're using a whole orchestra, or anything in between, or just vocals, you've got to think in that way, because a picture is not going to look good in a difficult frame. In other words, if you have a very ornate picture, simplicity in the frame is going to focus your attention on that. I mean, I know you know this as a producer more than anyone, that you are focusing the listener's attention on what you want them to listen to. During the guitar solo, you don't have a lot of other stuff going on. You've got enough going on with that guitar solo. And you want to make it sound as great as possible. So you want to mic it the right way. You want to have all of the elements there to serve your master, which is whoever's in the focus at the moment. So that's the way we're thinking.
You presumably are coming in at what stage? At, I suppose, all different stages. I'm sure there's some producers, songwriters, etc., that send you acoustic guitar, vocal, to a click. And then there's other times where it's like, we've finished the track. Here's our first mix. We feel like it needs some strings. Please put them on it. And I'm sure there's a combination thereof, depending on, I suppose, because thinking from my production standpoint, there's many songs I've worked on which I've already in my mind felt like this has to be based on strings or based on horns. And so I might actually have a very stripped down production and then give it to the arranger and say, hey, do everything that you can on this. I can always mute, and then I'll build around that.
I have been brought in at the very earliest stage when the songwriter just writes the song and says, what do you think? And at that point, I'm lucky enough to be able to say, hey, put it a third higher, it'll sound better. Or, and because that saves a lot of trouble later. But at the same time, I produced an album for the great group Hue and Cry, such talented guys. And they had this one song, which I heard it and I said, wait a minute, don't do anything on it. I'm going to do this completely with percussion. So I had marimba, vibraphone, glockenspiel, tubular bells. I had all kinds of tuned percussion, and we did the whole song with that. And it suited the nature of the song very well. And of course, his voice stuck out. So sometimes you can get these kinds of ideas to create something that's not just the fairly standard strings and brass, although my strings and brass are sort of on acid. Sometimes you can come up with different things. That's really fun when that happens.
I presume in many, many of these instances, you're being thrown examples. People are sending you a mix of multiple different songs, like, hey, I really like the sound of the strings here, and I like the sound of the horns here, but I want it to be more like this part here or that part there.
Yes.
I imagine a big part of your job is deciphering that and helping their vision.
It's always helping their vision. It's always helping their vision. Sometimes it's helping their vision with something that wasn't their vision, something that was beyond their vision, or something that they didn't know about. In other words, if you have only eaten steak and chips all your life, you're going to need help choosing what to eat in a French restaurant, because you just don't know. It's not your fault. It's not stupidity. It's ignorance. It's your job as a producer or as the arranger to take people, lead them out of ignorance into knowledge about all the possibilities. Sometimes I say to a group, when I'm working with a group, I say, you're only working with 3 colors. Now, that's great. You can make all the other colors from those 3 colors, but here, try some of these colors and see what that happens. And suddenly they're opened up to a whole new vista. I mean, we're working in sound. We're so lucky to work in a very specific area of sound. Over 50 years of doing this on records with all kinds of artists, from classical artists to jazz artists to pop artists to girl groups, all of that. You get to the point where you hear something and you can instantly hear, this would really work on this, try this. And you're eager to offer it to them, because it's like you're showing them a new chocolate mousse that you've just made, and you want them to taste it, which we're going to do later.
I suppose I don't want this to sound too esoteric, but I'm going to talk in very general terms. Major keys are predominantly happy. Minor keys are predominantly sad. Now, let's just say you're handed something which is, a 1-4-5. Maybe it goes to a 2 or a 6 once every now and then, but essentially it's a 1-4-5 kind of progression, and it's quite an upbeat track. But there's something maybe in the vocal, a lyric. Are you thinking that way? You know what I mean? Are you thinking there's something in this lyric here which brings on some melancholy? I'm just sort of intrigued what sparks your creativity, and then when your bag of tricks where you come in and go, okay, I'm going to make this actually feel like this is a minor here. I'm going to make this feel sadder here. I'm going to create some tension.
I always think that way, and I'm always listening to lyrics. I mean, being a songwriter myself and being a lyricist myself, I mean, people don't know it, but I've done a lot of work just as a lyricist where people give me stuff to write lyrics to. So it's a very important thing to me. I always want to express the ideas of the song. And when I interviewed Barry Manilow, he said, whenever I do a song, I'm arranging the lyric. And that tells you what to do, and it tells you what the story is, where it should rise, where the climax is. I'm always thinking that way. And I think because many artists who you are making records with are inexperienced, they just don't know all those different possibilities. What I tried to show again in the series of videos is that no matter who you are or where you're starting, if you use those principles of listening to the lyrics, looking at the form of the song, it's very important. People don't think enough about song form, and yet to a producer or arranger, it's really the Bible, because that's what you're recording is a form. And, it's like a story that the classic stories of all the great stories in the world that go from the initial meeting, the inception of the problem, the call to action, and then going on the great journey. I mean, this is what every record does. In the old days, 2.5 minutes, which is quite incredible. And people don't listen to lyrics enough. I mean, for instance, She Loves You. When I was working with McCartney, he said he was very proud of that song because it turned the love song on its head. And a lot of people don't realize it when they listen to it, but She Loves You, the lyric demanded that it be a kind of he wanted it to be a kind of a happy-go-lucky song, but the song isn't that at all. And in fact, the lyric is very sad. It's saying, I just saw your love and you think you've lost her, but she told me she loves you and she wants you back. And she knows you're not really the hurting kind. So now, wait a minute. Hold on. Why is Paul McCartney saying to his friend, why is he telling him this? As I noticed, and Paul told me that I was right about it, the backstory is that Paul's really in love with the girl. But he knows he can't have her because she's in love with him. So he decides to give the girl what she wants, is this guy who's actually a swine. But he tells his friend to get back with her. That's what she wants. You should be, with a love like that, you should be glad. So that's a really interesting song. And yet Paul knew that he had to make that song in the arrangement and the production of a happy-go-lucky little love song. So I always found that a very interesting thing. What I try to do is try to explain that no matter who you are, if you're, just an ordinary person sitting in your bedroom with, whatever equipment you can afford, you still can apply the principles of arranging to what you're doing and it will sound better. So you will get a result from knowing those principles of arranging. So I think that's the important thing that I'd like to get across, that anyone can benefit from knowing these principles. And, a lot of people don't get a chance to listen to that much music. I mean, I find that most of the students who I talk with have not heard any songs from the 50s, or they haven't heard very many, or the 60s, or the 70s, or the 80s. So that's what I tried to do, is take people through all of that to show that all of these songs have things we can learn from.
Well, this has been a serious pleasure talking to you, as ever. Thank you ever so much for the great video course, and now this wonderful, wonderful book. Of course, there is a link to both things down below. There will be a link to Richard's incredible video course and the book. There will be a raffle down below, so just enter down below, and at random, there will be 3 people picked, and Richard we will mail you a copy of the book if you win it, and he will sign it to you.
With my hand.
With your hand. And presumably some kind of dedication, if there's within reason. Let's be no soliloquies, no Shakespearean verses, just something simplistic.
I like Shakespeare.
Or maybe. Thanks, Richard. I really appreciate it. Enter to win one of the signed copies down below, and we'll see you all very soon. So long, farewell, auf Wiedersehen, au revoir, adios, goodbye, tschüss.
And bye-bye.